Hey everybody, got a Cthulhu War set up for a 4-player game using all 4 of the factions from the base game right now. All 4 factions are on the board. Everybody has all 6 cultists on the board, so the very first thing we're going to do at the start of the round is everybody needs to gather their power. Since everybody has 6 cultists and everybody starts the game controlling one gate to the otherworld dimension, that means every single player starts with exactly 8 power on their power track. And that goes for every single player, and since that's all we're going to do for the power phase, there's no cultists to sacrifice, nor any extra counting we need to figure out. It's a pretty quick, easy start for the game. The only thing we need to do is figure out who the start player is going to be. And since Cthulhu is in the game, and the rules state that anytime Cthulhu is in the game, he's always the first player, the Cthulhu player gets to be the first player, and they get to decide which direction the turns are going to go, whether the turns are going to go clockwise, or if the turns are going to go counterclockwise. And the basic decision is, do we want the king in yellow to go next? Or do we want the black goat to be the next player? We're going to go ahead and pick the turn order as clockwise, which means it's going to be Cthulhu, the black gate, crawling chaos, the yellow sign, then we'll be back to the great Cthulhu faction, and that'll be the entire play order for this game. For the first turn, we always skip the doom track and the ritual of annihilation phase. And again, we only do that in the very first round, so we bypass it. Don't need to check any victory conditions, so we're going to immediately move to the action phase, starting with the Great Cthulhu player, who needs to do one action. It can be a unique action or a common action. Unfortunately, since we don't have any special powers, we know it's going to be a common action. We're going to do our one action, and then our turn is going to end, and we're going to move over to the Black Goat player, who's going to do the same. The Cthulhu player is going to start out by doing a move action. They're going to elect to go ahead and spend 2 power, bringing them from 8 power down to 6 power, and they're going to use their move action, their 2 power, to move 2 of their cultists. They're going to move 1 of their cultists into the South Atlantic, and they're going to move their second cultist into the North Pacific. That's their one action for the turn. There's no unlimited actions they can take. Their turn is over. It is now the Black Goat player's turn. The Black Goat player for their turn is they're going to go ahead and accomplish one of their accomplishments. They need to go ahead and purchase one of their spell books. One of the things they can do, as it says, is as an action, we can sacrifice 2 of our cultists, which means they're removed from the board. And if we decide to do that as our action, we have reached one of the requirements to gain one of our spell books, and we can go ahead and pick one of our spell books, gain that spell book as a permanent power for our faction for the rest of the game. That doesn't cost us any power, but of course we just lost 2 of our cultists, so we need to figure out a way to start getting some power back later on in the round. We're going to go ahead and pick our spell book. We're going to choose the spell book, the red sign. We place it on top of the requirement we just met, which again was sacrificing 2 cultists. That'll end the Black Goat player's turn. It's now time for the Crawling Chaos to take their turn. The Crawling Chaos player is going to decide that they're going to try to overwhelm the entire game board, move quickly, and abuse their ability to move 2 spaces at one time. So they're going to go ahead and burn 2 power, bringing them down to 6 power, which is going to allow them to do a move action up to 2 creatures. Since they only have cultists in play, there's only creatures they move. And again, they move up to 2 spaces. So when the cultist is going to move 2 spaces, which is going to take them in this space right here, which is one entire area that stretches all the way across the board. And matter of fact, it allows them to connect with a lot of spaces. So it's a really good move for them based on the strategy that they're going to be using to get as many creatures on the board as quickly as they can. Their second amount of power is we use to move this guy across the North Pacific, which happens to be connected to North Pacific on this side. That'll be 1 space. And now one really cool thing about Cthulhu Wars is entering a space with an opponent does not mean you automatically have to fight them. You have to actually choose to use the battle action. And since we're not doing that, we're going to continue with our second movement of our move. Since again, remember, blue gets moved 2 spaces for every move action they take. And we're going to end up in North America. That's going to cost us 2 power. That's the end of Crawling Chaos' turn. It's now time for the yellow sign. The yellow sign player for their turn is going to spend 1 power for 1 move action. Now remember, you can move 1 or as many units as you want, as long as you want to spend the power to pay for it. We're going to be a little bit conservative with the yellow player, spend 1 power. We're going to move 1 cultist, 1 space, and that's going to be our sole action for our lone cultist. That's going to be in the yellow player's turn. It's now back to the Great Cthulhu faction. The Great Cthulhu player is going to go ahead and spend 3 power, bring them down from 6 all the way down to 3 power. They're going to go ahead and build a gate in the North Pacific. Their cultist is automatically going to occupy that gate, which means now that the Cthulhu player now controls 2 gates. And I'm sorry, I forgot to keep one of these guys on the gate, which is what I should have done originally. But we now control 2 gates as the Cthulhu player. We're now in 3 different areas. And we're actually trying to meet one of our requirements to get a spellbook into play, and we're almost about at that point. That ends the green player's turn. We're now on to the red player's turn. The black goat player is going to go ahead and spend 3 power, bring them down from 8 down to 5 power. And they're going to spend a total of 3 power to bring out their first Dark Young, which costs them a total of 3 power. The really cool thing, though, is because now that they got the spellbook in play, this does mean that their Dark Young, not only can they build gates, their Dark Young can also give them power when the power phase comes around. So we're working our way back to getting power we've lost from getting rid of those 2 cultists to bring the spellbook into play. Red's turn is over. We're now back to blue. The blue player is pretty much almost going to exactly copy the green player's turn. They're going to spend a total of 3 power. They're going to build a gate, and they're going to occupy it with their cultists because they're trying to get a lot of power, so they start getting a lot of their creatures on the board, which is part of their strategy. Ending the blue player's turn, we're now back to the yellow player's turn. The yellow player, for their turn, they're going to go ahead and be very gutsy. Then they're going to bring out their very first great old one. They're going to bring out the king in yellow, and the requirements for the king in yellow states is all you have to do is spend 4 power and have one of your units in an area that you currently do not have a gate. We're going to go ahead and spend the 4 power, bringing us down to 3 power. We're going to bring out the king in the yellow in Scandinavia, where we currently have 1 cultist, but no gate, matching both requirements we need. We have used up our action. The yellow player's turn is over. It's now back to the green player's turn. But before the green player can take his turn, the yellow player did manage to complete one of the requirements to bring one of their spellbooks into play. All we have to do is awaken the king in yellow. We've awakened the king in yellow. We get to pick one of our spellbooks, gain it as a permanent power, and we're going to go ahead and take the Screaming Dead power, which is going to allow us to move the king in yellow with undead, making him a very powerful force that's going to allow him to start desecrating all the way across the board and give him a lot of extra power. The green players, for their action, they're going to go ahead and spend their remaining 3 power, bring them down to 0 power, which means they can't do any more actions this turn. But that 3 power is going to allow them to build a gate in the South Atlantic. They're going to occupy it with their cultists, and now they've also managed to meet one of the requirements they need to get one of their spellbooks in play. It simply states that if we control 3 gates that happen to be in water, or there just happen to be 4 gates in water spaces alone, we get to bring one of our spellbooks into play. And since we have 3 gates under our control in ocean spaces, we've managed to complete one of our requirements. We're going to go ahead and get one of our first spellbooks, and we're going to go ahead and get the Dream ability, which is going to allow us to be a thorn in the side for the other players, because it's going to allow us to corrupt other cultists over to our faction. If the other player is not smart about how they're laying their cultists out, we can start stealing gates away from other players by using this power, as long as we have cultists not on the board in our reserves to use. The red player is going to go ahead and spend 2 power, bringing them from 5 power down to 3. They're doing a move action, and they're going to move 2 of their units. They're going to move their Dark Young into Arabia, and they're going to move one of their cultists into East Africa, and that's 2 power. That leaves them with 3 power. Their turn is over, and we're now going to move to the Crawling Chaos player, who still happens to have 3 power to spend, and they're going to go ahead and spend all 3 of that power to build a gate in North America and occupy it. That's going to be the end of the Crawling Chaos's turn, and since they're also out of power, they're also out for the rest of the round. The king and yellow player is going to go ahead and spend 1 power, bring him down to 2 power. They're going to move one of their cultists over here to this area in Scandinavia with the king in yellow and with the 2 other cultists. That's their action. They're done for the turn. And since Great Cthulhu is out of power, they don't get to do anything. We get to bypass them, and now we're going to come up to the black goat player, who's simply going to spend 3 power to go ahead and build a gate in East Africa. Then they're going to go ahead and occupy that gate, ensuring that when the power phase comes back around, they're going to get a decent amount of power to start the next round. That's going to end the black goat's turn. Crawling Chaos has no power. We're back to the yellow sign, who gets to go ahead and spend 2 power to do a desecrate action, which is also going to give them some power if they succeed. Desecrate is a special power for the king in yellow, and what that says is if we choose to spend the 2 power to use the desecrate action, and we roll the die, if we roll a number less than the total amount of units we happen to have in that area is going to become desecrated, and whether we succeed or fail on our desecration attempt, we get to bring a monster or a cultist with a cost of 2 power or less into play in that area right with the king in yellow for free, making this a great action that is not only going to give us more power on future turns, it gave us a free unit, And on top of that, we managed to desecrate one of the areas that are a requirement for us to gain one more of our spell books. The king and yellow player is going to go ahead and pick one of their spell books. They're going to go ahead and take the Zingaya power, which is going to allow them to start using their undead to turn the enemy cultists into more undead for our ever-growing army of undead. That's the end of the first round. All of our players are out of power. We need to go back to the very first start of the very first phase to start the second round, where all the players need to figure out how much power they're going to gain. Normally for the power phase, all the players can calculate all their power at the same time, and it makes things play a lot quicker. But just so I can show you exactly how the game plays, I'm going to show you individually how much power each one of these factions are going to gain. We'll go ahead and start with the Cthulhu player first to figure out exactly how much power they're going to gain. They have 6 cultists on the board. That's going to be worth 6 power. They control 3 gates. That's going to be an additional 6 power for a total of 12 power for the Cthulhu player, which is going to be a pretty good start for the next round. We don't have any enemy cultists to sacrifice. We don't have any other special abilities that are going to give us extra power. So the Cthulhu player is going to start this round with a total of 12 power and 3 gates under their control for the Doom phase. We'll move over to the Black Goat player. They have 4 cultists in play, which is going to be worth 4 power. They control 2 gates, which is an additional 4 power for a total of 8. But they also have the spellbook that guarantees that all their Dark Young are also going to give them power. So that brings them to a total of 9 power. Not quite as much as the Cthulhu player, but still not terrible, and definitely enough to start doing some damage when their turns start coming around. Move over to the Crawling Chaos. They're going to have 6 cultists on the board. They control 3 gates for a total of 12 power. That's all they're going to get since they have any other abilities that are going to give them any extra power. And now we're going to move over to the King and Yellow player, who's going to have to figure out their power differently because they have a special ability and they also get power from desecration tokens. And if you forget, that's actually a special power for the yellow sign faction. Anytime they have a unit in an area with a desecration token, and for every area that has a unit and a desecration token, they're going to gain an extra power. So this area, since we have 1 desecration, at least 1 unit in here is going to give us 1 power. We happen to have all 6 of our cultists in play. That's going to be a total of 7 power, plus 2 for the controlled gate. That's going to give us a total of 9 power. Not a bad start for the next round. So our starting for this current round is 12 power, 9 power, 12 power, and again 9 power for all of our players. So now we need to figure out if anybody is going to get free power for being lagging too far behind. The person with the highest amount of power happens to be 12. So that means the person with the lowest amount of power has to have at least 6, which is half of 12. Luckily, nobody's down that low in the power, so we're going to ignore raising any of the power for that reason. So now we need to figure out who the new starting player is, and the way that works is we need to figure out who has the most power this turn. So we're going to look at Cthulhu has 12, Crawling Chaos has 12, so it's a tie between both those players. So whenever you have a tie, whoever was the starting player the prior round gets to decide and break the tie. And they can even pick themselves if they want. And since Cthulhu happened to be the starting player last round, they get to decide and break the tie. They're going to go ahead and decide that they get to be the starting player. And they're going to go ahead and just change things up and make the turn order go in counterclockwise order, which means it's going to be Cthulhu, Yellow Sign, Crawling Chaos, Black Goat, and we're going to go around in counterclockwise order. Now, since this happens to be the second round of the game, and from the second round on, every single turn, we're going to have to figure out the Doom gauge now at this point. And players are also going to get a chance to do a Ritual of Annihilation, if they choose so, in player order. So the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out how many movement points we're going to get on the Doom track for each one of our players. And it's pretty simple. We just count up how many gates that faction happens to control. So Cthulhu controls 3 gates, so they're going to move up to number 3 on the Doom track. The King in Yellow controls only 1 gate, so they're only going to move up 1 on the Doom track. The Crawling Chaos player currently controls 3 gates, matching them up with Cthulhu. And finally, the Black Goat faction currently only controls 2 gates, moving them to number 2 on the Doom track. Now the players in player order need to decide if they want to do a Ritual Annihilation. And since the Ritual track is currently at 5 points, it's only going to cost them 5 power to do so. And if they do it, and they happen to have one of their great old ones in play, not only are they going to get extra movement on the Doom track, they're also going to get some broken elder signs, which can be some extra victory points at the end of the game. So starting with the Cthulhu player, they need to decide if they want to do a ritual. Their Cthulhu player is going to decline to do it, which means they can't change their mind anymore after watching what the other players do. So now since we're going in counterclockwise order, the king and yellow player needs to decide if they want to do so. If they do, they're going to spend 5 power. They're only going to gain 1 movement on the doom track, but they're going to gain 1 elder sign, which can be worth anywhere from 1 to 3 victory points, because they do happen to have their great old one in play. So it is kind of tempting, but that's only going to leave them with 4 power for the rest of this turn, which really doesn't sound that great right now. So they're going to go ahead and decline, and then we're going to go to the crawling chaos player, who needs to decide if they're going to do the ritual of annihilation. The crawling chaos player is kind of tempted to do the ritual of annihilation, because if they do, they're going to get 3 movement on the doom track. They're not going to get any broken elder signs because they don't have the great old one in play, but they definitely have enough power to do it. And if they did decide to do it, they still have 7 power left, which wouldn't be too bad, but it's not enough to do what they plan on doing this turn. So they're also going to elect not to do the ritual. We're going to come to a black goat player who is also needing all their power, so they're also going to decline. So we're going to move past the ritual of annihilation phase. Nobody has won the game, so we're going to bypass the end victory conditions. We're going to move directly back into the action phase for the second round of the game. Before we end the doom phase, moving to the action phase though, Cthulhu's one of his spellbook requirements does trigger immediately, which basically says the very first time you experience a doom phase, which happens in the second round of the game, one of their spellbook requirements is going to be met. So they're going to go ahead and pick one of their spellbooks. They're going to go ahead and pick Devolve, which is an ongoing power, which is going to allow them to turn any one of their cultists on the board into a deep one, which can be very strategic because it'll allow them to get deep ones into play, and also allow them to get cultists back into their reserves, which is allow them the ability to use their dream power to bring those cultists back on the board, creating a very nasty cycle of cycling out deep ones and acolytes and helping them slowly move around the board, bringing out more powerful units. So now we get to move to the action phase, and we're going to start with a Cthulhu player who's going to go ahead and spend 2 power to do a move action, bring them down from 12 down to 10 power. They're going to move one of their cultists over into Australia, and they're going to move a second cultist over into the North Pacific with their other cultist, and that's 2 movement, 2 power, ending their turn. But they do have their special ability that says at the end of any player's turn, not just their turn, but at the end of any player's turn, they can go ahead and devolve one of their cultists into a deep one. We're going to go ahead and decide to devolve this cultist that we just moved over here. He's going to turn into a deep one, and now we have a little bit of extra threat on the crawling chaos player in a couple different ways. First of all, this deep one is adjoining this area. If he can move over in here before this player can protect him, we can capture that cultist. We can do the same in this area right here. We also, since the North Pacific is connected on this side, we can also harass him on this side. So the blue player needs to be very careful what the Cthulhu player is doing, because we just open up a lot of options to harass the blue player and gain some extra power by capturing some cultists. It's the end of the Cthulhu player's turn. We're now going to move back to yellow sign. The yellow player, for their move, they're going to go ahead and activate one of their special abilities from their spellbook, which says that if we spend 1 action and 1 power, we can move the king in yellow, and any undead who happen to be in the same area are going to move along with them. So we're going to spend 1 power going from 9 down to 8, and we're going to move the king in yellow to this space up here, bring in the undead with them. Now the nice thing about this is it's a spellbook power, which means we can move as many undead with us as we want, whether that's 2, 4, or even if we happen to get all 6 undead out. It's only going to cost 1 power to move the king in yellow plus all those undead, making this a very nasty amount of trouble we can cause for the other players, because remember, a monster can capture any cultist, and we can start desecrating. And not only that, we have the Zingaya power, which is allows us to turn any cultist into an undead, which is also going to help us desecrate. It's now the crawling chaos player's turn, and they're basically realizing that they're either going to lose a cultist or they're going to lose a cultist, so they need to figure out a way to at least prevent themselves from losing a lot of cultists versus just losing 1 cultist at all. And this is also where I noticed that I should actually have 1 spellbook, because I have managed to capture 3 portals, which was one of the requirements for a spellbook. So we're going to go ahead and take the Seek and Destroy power, which is going to help us start bringing units into battles, because it's a pre-battle ability and it's also part of our strategy. So now, like I said, we need to figure out what we want to do. We're either going to lose this cultist or we're going to lose this cultist. So either way, we're going to lose a gate. So we're going to go ahead and pick a move action, but we need to pick a move action that's going to prevent us from taking the most amount of casualties and still help us and put us in a good position for the next turn. The blue player, for their turn, is they're going to go ahead and decide to take a move action, and they're going to spend 3 power. And the reason why they're spending 3 power to move 3 units is because they know that the Cthulhu player is going to be Very, very dangerous with their ability called dreams, which is allowing them to start stealing cultists if they're not very, very careful. So blue knows they've already lost a cultist unless they play smart. At least they can keep the cultist and avoid losing it, although they are going to lose a gate. So let's go ahead and spend the 3 power, taking us from 12 down to 9. We're going to move this one cultist 1 space over here. Remember, our cultist can move up to 2 spaces, but we don't want to because we want to have a backup cultist in this area. Then we're going to spend the other 2 power to move 2 more cultists over here into North Asia, leaving us 2 cultists in South Asia, 2 cultists in North Asia, and also 2 cultists in North America, at least protecting us from Cthulhu's dream power, although it's not going to protect us for long, so we need to start planning our long-term goals. It's the end of the blue player's turn. We now get to go to the red player, who needs to make some decisions very quickly before they also become a victim of Cthulhu's powers. The red player for their turn is they're going to bring some monsters into play, and they're going to start abusing some of their own personal faction abilities, which is the ability their black goat says that when they bring monsters into play, they can bring as many monsters as they want into play. Now again, it's monsters, not cultists. They can still only summon 1 cultist per action. But when they bring monsters into play, they can bring as many as they want, as many different types as they want, as long as they're willing to burn the power. So we have 9 power right now. We're going to go ahead and burn 6 power, bring us down to 3 power. And we're going to bring our other 2 Dark Young into play. And then after we bring them into play, that's our action. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do 2 very quick unlimited actions, which are going to free up our cultists to move around and also protect our gates. As an unlimited action, we're going to take these cultists off the gate, put our Dark Young on the gate, and we're going to do the same thing over on this side. And this does a couple things. First of all, it protects us from Cthulhu's dreams power. It also gives us some powerful creatures on the board, and it puts us in some very good position in the future rounds because we can start moving our cultists out now, setting us up for better actions in the rest of this turn. The Cthulhu player, for their action, they're going to go ahead and spend 1 power, bring them down to 9. They're going to move their deep one into North America here, doing that 1 solo action, also causing some pressure on the blue player and almost pretty much telegraphing what their intentions are. Now, of course, we still have our ongoing ability that we do at the end of any player's action to turn a cultist into a deep one if we want it anytime. We're not going to do that yet because we have some really good plans. We're done with the green player. It's now time for the yellow player to take their turn. The yellow player for their turn, they're going to go ahead and burn 3 power for a move action. They're going to go down from 8 down to 5 power. They're going to move 1 cultist, a 2nd cultist, and as an limited action, they're going to go ahead and take the gate. And they're going to go ahead and move a 3rd cultist into Scandinavia, ending their turn, and now we're back to the Crawling Chaos player's turn. Crawling Chaos for their action, they're going to go ahead and spend 3 power, bringing them down from 9 down to 6, and they're going to go ahead and bring their first major monster into play. They're going to bring a hunting horror into North America, ensuring that this deep one cannot start capturing these cultists, at least protecting this gate, but they need to start worrying about what they're going to start doing with their other areas, because you can't play too defensively. You got to balance offense and defense, otherwise you're going to lose at Cthulhu Wars. The red player for their turn, they're going to go ahead and do 1 very quick action. And again, since they have the red sign in play, that means their dark ones, their dark young, can start building gates. So this dark one in Arabia is going to go ahead and build a gate and occupy it, which means when the power phase comes back around, as long as things don't change, the black goat player is going to start the next turn with 13 power, which is pretty respectable and enough for them to start doing some damage and possibly even bring their great old one into play. The black goat is out of power, so they're pretty much out of it for the rest of this turn. We're now back to the Cthulhu player, who needs to figure out what they want to do, since blue is being somewhat sneaky and preventing the Cthulhu player from doing exactly what they want to do. The Cthulhu player for their turn, they're going to go ahead and spend 3 power, bring them down from 9 all the way down to 6 power, and they're going to go ahead and activate their dream ability, which is going to make 1 player in one of the areas we pick have to pick one of their cultists who's going to be corrupted and move to a different faction. We're going to go ahead and pick North Asia, which means this player must take one of their cultists, remove them from the board, and then we get to add one of our cultists over there in North Asia, spreading us across the board and increasing our range of power potentially, especially since we definitely still have a lot of power and there's a lot of things we can still do. That's the end of our turn unless we want to choose to devolve one of our cultists, and since we have no cultists in our reserves, we're going to go ahead and turn one of our cultists into a deep one. Actually, looking at the board and looking at the fact that we can always be very sneaky with that devolve power because we can use it during any player's turn, we're going to hold that in reserve and just use it as our ace in the hole and look at what everybody else is going to be doing so we don't rush our turn, because rushing is never going to help you win this game. Cthulhu player's turn is over. It's now time for the king and yellow player to see if they can desecrate some areas, increasing their sphere of influence and their power. The king and yellow player is currently in the Antarctic Ocean. We just have to roll the die if we're going to do our desecrate. We currently have 4 units in the area. It's going to cost us 2 power to do. We're going to go down from 5 down to 3. And we're going to roll the die. If we get a 4 or less, we get to add a desecration token. We're going to go ahead and roll a 1. That means we're going to add a desecration token to the Arctic Ocean, and that also means we get to bring a creature into play as long as it costs 2 power or less. We're going to go ahead and bring another undead into play, because remember, every time the king in yellow moves, if we use the power, undead are going to move with us, and you slowly see how we're building our army of undead. End of the yellow sign's turn. We're now going to move over to Crawling Chaos, who needs to figure out exactly what they need to do, and they think they're going to go ahead and start enhancing their defenses because they're already losing a little bit of power, and they're already losing some cultists, so they're going to go ahead and burn 3 power immediately to go ahead and bring 1 more hunting horror into play in the South Asia to protect themselves. And that's actually what the Cthulhu player was hoping would happen, because now they can devolve and capture that cultist. We'll go ahead and devolve this cultist right now, remove him from the board. He's going to become a deep one. Now remember, a monster can capture a cultist, and there's nothing the blue player can do before the Cthulhu player gets his turn, and that's why we waited the way we did. It's now time for the black goat to go. Unfortunately, the black goat player has no power left, so we're going to bypass him. Come to the Cthulhu player's turn, who's going to go ahead and do a capture action, capturing the very first cultist in the game. The Cthulhu player simply spends 1 power, bringing him down to 5 power, capturing this cultist, putting it on our faction board, so remember that we can sacrifice him later. And this also means that this cultist is not available to the blue player to bring back into play until it's been sacrificed, so that's effectively hamstrung the blue player in 2 very distinct ways. They have less cultists to access, and it also means they're going to gain less power the next phase because they have less access to cultists. The king in yellow player is going to go ahead and spend 1 power and use their special ability to allow them to move the king in yellow plus any undead with them. They're going to go ahead and move into North America. And now remember, combat is not automatic in this game. You have to actually choose to do a battle. Enemy factions can share the same spaces with other players without any problems at all. Again, that's also part of the strategy. Do you want to move and risk being attacked or not? Things you got to decide anytime you do your actions. That's going to be our 1 power spent. That's the end of the yellow player's turn. We're now back to Crawling Chaos, who needs to figure out what they want to do. It's now the Crawling Chaos's player, and they realize that they are slowly losing to a battle of attrition, so they don't start making some decisions very, very quickly. They're going to be in a world of hurt very, very fast. So what they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and initiate a battle, since they have an enemy currently in their same space. And the enemy happens to be the king in yellow. And the unfortunate thing about the king in yellow is he has 0 attack power at all, which is unfortunate for a great old one. The only attack power he happens to have is any other units who happen to be traveling around with him. And the amount of attack power they're going to have is the amount of undead, at least in this example, -1, because that's the attack power for the undead. Which means since we have 2 undead, we're going to have a whole measly 1 attack power for this battle as the yellow player. And the blue player knows this. So they're going to go ahead and spend 1 power to go ahead and initiate a battle. Now remember, anytime you're in an area with multiple factions, you need to pick which faction you're going to fight. The blue player decides that they're going to go ahead and attack the yellow player. So Crawling Chaos versus the yellow sign faction. And the first thing we need to do now that we've announced the battle, we need to see if there's any pre-battle actions that are going to occur. The attacker gets to do the pre-battle actions first, so we're going to go ahead and activate Seek and Destroy, which allows us to move any hunting horrors anywhere on the board into the current battle, which is going to move us from rolling only 2 combat dice to allow us to roll 4 combat dice for this battle. Because remember, cultists don't roll any combat dice unless you happen to be the black goat with the spellbook. That's going to give your cultist 1 attack strength. Crawling Chaos is done with their pre-battle abilities, so now it's up to the king or the yellow sign player to do any pre-battle abilities. And since they don't have any, we're going to move immediately into the battle phase, where the Crawling Chaos is going to roll their attack dice first, and then the king and yellow player needs to roll their defense dice or their attack dice back, and we're going to figure out any results that we're going to get. Now remember, any rolls of 1, 2, or 3 are going to be completely worthless, so we go ahead and remove them. Any 4s or 5s are going to be a pain versus an enemy, and any 6s are going to be kills scored against our opponent. So first things first, the attacker decides to resolve any of their kills. So the attacker got 1 kill versus the enemy. So the defender needs to pick one of their units who's going to go ahead and die. And obviously we're not going to let the king die if we have any weaker units who can take the death for us. So we're going to have one of our undead who are going to die in this battle. And now the king and yellow player needs to figure out if they managed to score any kills. Unfortunately, they didn't. They only got a pain result. So now we move back to the attacker who needs to resolve any of his pain results. We got 2 pain results, so that means the king and yellow player needs to have 2 other units, which is all we happen to have left in this battle, and they need to retreat. And we need to make sure we retreat to an area that does not contain units of the color involved in the battle we just fought. So that basically means we can't move to an area that has blue units currently in them. That's okay. We're going to go ahead and move to South America with our 2 units. Not a big deal. Both of them are going to retreat. That handles the retreat action. And now the Crawling Chaos player needs to pick one of their units who's going to retreat, because that's what happened from this fight here. We're going to go ahead and retreat one of our Hunting Horrors, and they're going to go ahead and move to the North Atlantic. And that ends the combat for all the players involved. There's no post-battle effects because nobody has any post-battle spellbooks. That ends that battle. That ends that fight. That ends Crawling Chaos's turn. Black Goat is no longer in this round because they're out of power. We're back at the Great Cthulhu player. The Cthulhu player, for their turn, they're going to go ahead and burn 3 power, bring them from 5 down to 2 power. And they're going to go ahead and build another gate. This gate's going to go in Australia, where they happen to have a cultist. Their cultist is going to go ahead and occupy that gate, ensuring that they're going to have a very good start for the next round, especially since we still have a little bit of power left, and we can still bring our last cultist back into play, giving us a very, very bright start for the next round. That's the end of the Cthulhu player's turn, unless we want to try to devolve one of our cultists, which we could do, but again, we can do that anytime. So we're going to wait, sit back, and see what all the other players are going to decide to do. We're now back to the king and yellow player's turn, who is going to go ahead and do the desecrate action for the final action. That's going to go ahead and burn 2 power, leaving with no power left. And the reason why they're doing this, 2 reasons. One, if they desecrate South America, it's got the symbol on the board that they need to match, which is going to give them another spell book, which is going to increase their power. If they also manage to desecrate, they're also going to get some extra power during the power phase because they're going to have a unit in an area that's desecrated. So this is going to give them a lot of benefits if they can manage to succeed at this die roll. They need to roll a 2 or less to successfully desecrate South America. We're going to go ahead and roll a 1, which means we're going to succeed at our desecrate roll. We're going to go ahead and desecrate South America. We've desecrated one of the areas matching the symbols that we need to. We're going to gain another spellbook, so we're going to go ahead and pick our spellbook and add it to the board. The king and yellow player is going to go ahead and pick the spellbook, Mark of the Bayaki, or Biaki, however you want to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. I'm probably going to butcher it. I'm sure somebody will correct me at least. So we're going to go ahead and get our 3rd spellbook, and this means that once we start getting these guys in play, we can start maneuvering these guys quite a bit. So that's going to give us a lot more flexibility as the yellow sign player. Unfortunately, that's all of our power. That's the end of our turn. We're back to Crawling Chaos, who needs to figure out what they want to do with their remaining 2 power. It's pretty easy for them. They're going to burn 1 power, bring one of their cultists back in the board into South Asia, so at least they're going to have a little bit of power when the power phase comes around. That's going to end their turn. We're back over to the Great Cthulhu player, who still has 2 power, and they're going to go ahead and burn 1 of those power, bring one of their cultists into play. They're going to go ahead and put them in the South Atlantic. That leaves them with 1 power. Yellow sign has no power left. Crawling Chaos still has 1 power, and they need to figure out what they want to do with that 1 remaining power. Crawling Chaos will go ahead and spend 1 power. They're going to go ahead and bring a Night Gaunt into play, and they're going to bring it into play in South Asia, hopefully defending themselves a little bit so they can at least get a better start in the next round. They're out of power. The Black Goat is out of power. Cthulhu still has 1 power left over if they want to do anything. They're simply going to go ahead and spend 1 power for a movement, move this deep one into Scandinavia, causing some pressure for the yellow player, who they see is now starting to desecrate a lot of the board, meaning they're going to start getting a lot of power if they're not kept in check very, very quickly. All the players are out of power. Everybody's done all their actions. That's the end of the 2nd round. We're now going to move to the 3rd round, start of the round where everybody starts to gather their power all over again. So we'll go ahead and figure out the power for Cthulhu. Now remember, normally when you're playing this, all the players are going to figure out their power at the same time, which will make this go a heck of a lot quicker. But since I'm explaining the game to you, I'm going to show you it all down individually for each faction, starting with the Cthulhu player's faction. We're going to gain 6 power for all of our cultists in play. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cultists in play. That's going to be a total of 6 power. We currently control 4 gates. Each gate is going to be worth 2 powers. That's going to be a total of 8. Plus the 6 from the cultists we have on the board is a total of 14. Plus, we're going to go ahead and sacrifice this cultist, so it's going to go back to the Crawling Chaos player, so he's available in their pool again. That's going to be a total of 15 power for us to have on this round, which is a very good amount. It's definitely going to be very, very tempting for us to summon Cthulhu this round, and that's probably what we're going to do. That's all the power for the Great Cthulhu player. We now need to figure out exactly how much power the Yellow Sign player gets, which is going to be very unique because we have these desecration tokens on the board, even though we don't control a lot of gates. So let's go ahead and figure out the power for the Yellow Sign player. We're going to gain 2 for this gate, 2 for this gate, which is going to be a total of 4. We're going to gain 1, 2, 3 for the desecration tokens. That's going to bring us up to a total of 7. We have 6 cultists on the board. That's going to bring us to a total of 13 power. We don't have any cultists to sacrifice, but a 13 power is pretty darn respectable, so that's going to give us enough power to do some pretty darn good things on our turn. We now need to figure out exactly where Crawling Chaos stands on the power play. Crawling Chaos currently controls 2 gates. We have 2 power plus 2 more powers, a total of 4. We also have 5 cultists on the board. That's going to give us a total of 9 power. We don't have anybody to sacrifice, but 9 power isn't too terrible. At least it gives us enough to do some actions. And now we get to move to the Black Goat player, who controls 3 gates, which is going to be worth 6 power total. We're going to gain 3 more power because we have our Dark Young in play. Remember, we have the special ability, meaning our Dark Young are going to give us power. So that's going to be a total of 9 power. Plus, we still have 4 cultists in play. 9 plus 4 is a total of 13 power. Again, the Black Goat player has a lot of power. They're looking pretty darn good as things go. They don't have any cultists to sacrifice. And now we need to see if anybody's trailing so far behind that they get that free bonus of power. So we figure out who has the most power, which happens to be Great Cthulhu, which means the minimum amount of power that any other player can have is half of that rounded up. So each player has to have at least 8 power. If they have less than that, they're going to be raised to 8. Luckily, we have 13, we have 9, and we have 13, so nobody's going to get that free bonus thanks to Great Cthulhu's large amount of power pool. We now get to figure out who the first player is going to be again, and things haven't changed too much. Cthulhu's been holding on to their power lead. They get to figure out who's going to go first, and they're liking the fact of King in Yellow being the second player, or the Yellow Sign, so they're going to keep the play order going counterclockwise. With Cthulhu being the first player, we now move to the Doom phase. Starting with the Cthulhu player, we count up how many gates we have. We can currently control 4 gates. We're going to move from 3 all the way up to 7 for the Cthulhu player. Next, we need to figure out the King in Yellow, who currently only controls 2 gates. They're going to go from 1 all the way up to 3. They're not quite out of the game yet. No reason to be worried for them yet. We're going to move to Crawling Chaos. The blue player currently controls 2 gates. They're going to go from 3 on the Doom track to 5. And then finally, we're going to look at the Black Goat player, currently controlling 3 gates. They're going to go from 2 also up to 5. So it's still a pretty close game. 7, 2 at 5, 1 at 3. Nobody's completely out yet. And now we need to see if anybody wants to do a ritual of annihilation. The Cthulhu player gets to decide first, and they're going to go ahead and try to cement their lead early, especially while the rituals are still fairly inexpensive. Right now the ritual only costs 5, so they are going to burn 5 power, going from 15 all the way down to 10 power. The track is going to move up, so the next person to do the ritual is going to cost them 6 power. And since we did the ritual, we're going to gain 1 doom point for every gate we currently control, effectively doubling our score for this round only. We still control 4 gates. We're going to go from 7 all the way up to 11, taking a very commanding lead in the very early phases of this game. The King and Yellow player now needs to decide if they're going to do a ritual of annihilation. They're actually going to do it also. It's going to cost them 6 points to do, moving the ritual track up to 7. Their power is going to go from 13 all the way down to 7 because they just spent 6 power to do the ritual annihilation. They currently control 2 gates, so they're going to go from 3 to 5, at least putting them in tied for last place with all the other players. But the main reason why they did that is because, remember, the yellow player has their Great Old One in play, which means they get to pick one of these broken Elder Sign tokens that can be worth anywhere from 1 all the way up to 3 victory points. They're not going to show any other players exactly the amount on that broken Elder Sign. They can place it face down on their faction board, knowing that technically, unlike the rest of the players who are tied with him at 5, they technically actually have 8 victory points towards the end of the game. But the other players don't know that because this can be worth anywhere from 1 to 3 victory points. That's it for the yellow player. Now the Crawling Chaos needs to decide if they want to do a ritual. It would cost them 7 points of power, leaving them with only 2 power, which would be very stupid of them to do at this point because it's only going to give them 2 points on the Doom track. They're going to pass. It's now up to the Black Goat player, who's liking the fact that they have the most amount of power and they know they can abuse the heck out of that. So they're also going to decline, ending the power phase, or ending the doom track phase, ending the ritual of annihilation phase. And now we need to see if anybody's won. We know nobody has, so now we move back to the action phase. So we're going to go ahead and start the action phase with the Cthulhu player. Remember, they are the starting player. Even though they burned power for the ritual, they did that after starting player is decided, so it doesn't make them lose the starting player position. They're going to go ahead and do a very gutsy move. Well, it's kind of a stupid move, but I'm just trying to show you how the game works. We're going to go ahead and burn all 10 of our power. We're going to bring Cthulhu into play, and the reason why we're able to do that is because one of the requirements is there's a gate in our starting area, which there is. The next thing we have to be able to do is we have to be able to spend 10 power to afford it, which we can. And the really cool thing is, since Cthulhu faction has the immortal ability, every time Cthulhu is summoned, we get to bring a broken gate elder sign token into play on our faction board. We're going to draw one. Unfortunately, we drew a 1, but again, we're not going to show the other players what we drew. We're going to place this on our board, and while this may have seemed like a really stupid move to do already, it's going to do a couple things. One, we're going to gain extra power because Awakening Cthulhu is a requirement for getting one of our spell books. 2, every time Cthulhu awakens for the Cthulhu faction, we're going to get one of these Elder Sign tokens every single time we bring him back to life. And 3, from now on, and since we've summoned him for the first time, each additional summoning of Cthulhu only costs 4 points instead of this great large amount of power of 10. So now not only is he cheaper to bring out, I really don't care if he dies, because every time I bring him back into play for only 4 power, I'm going to get more of these broken Elder Signs. I'm going to get a very powerful unit, and I'm also going to get the ability to get this extra power out on the board by doing this. So again, probably not the greatest move. I'm probably going to lose a lot of my power base now because I was painting a big target on my head since I have no more power to defend myself. But again, I'm just showing you how the game plays. I think I've shown you just enough of how the Cthulhu Wars game plays. I've shown you 2.5 rounds, start of a 3rd round just to give you an idea. Shown you combat, shown you how the great old ones come into play, shown you how power works, and I've shown you just a little bit about how the strategies work and how they can evolve as you play, as you lose units, as you gain units, and as you start gaining and losing map dominance. Hope you enjoyed this gameplay video for Cthulhu Wars. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave in the YouTube comments down below. Stay tuned for my full review of the game, and as always, thank you for watching.